Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, welcome into the podcast. On today's podcast, we are going to be talking about creating a standard of how the taken in hand should receive punishment.
Of course, before we get to that, if you're enjoying our content, would you please hit that like button so that we know that you're enjoying it? And of course, those of you who have not subscribed yet, we want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button, because every time someone hits the subscribe button, it makes me smile.
And if you want to get bonus content, help support us doing what we do here, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. And now until December 6th, we are running a sale on Patreon membership. You can get 50% off your first month. So definitely check out the link down below and use the promo code to get that discount.
That sounds like a good deal. I would take advantage of that for sure. So we are talking about being able to receive punishment well.
Yes. And I think that that's kind of the theme of this episode, is just to create a standard of what it looks like to receive punishment appropriately, because I know that this is something that I have struggled with in the past. I know it's something that a lot of taken in hand struggle with, and it's something that I think gets overlooked in the conversation a lot. I don't think we've ever really done an episode about it. And honestly, even within our own relationship, I don't think we've talked a lot about this.
No, not at all. And in fact, when you just mentioned just now about a lot of taken in hands, have a hard time with this. Do you think from what you have seen with other taken in hands that it's all of them? Is it a good majority of them?
I think that it really depends on the head of household, to be honest, because left to our own devices and without direction, I would say the vast majority, if not all, taken in hands will struggle with this. But there are some head of households that have a little bit more foresight to understand that this is going to be a struggle, and so they may preemptively have these conversations or set these standards, or at least give some direction. And so the taken in hands that have the head of households that are giving more direct instruction on this particular area, they tend to struggle less because they know the expectation. And I think that that's why I wanted to talk through this, because once you know the expectation, once you know what the standard is, it's a lot easier to meet that standard. It's when you don't know and you haven't had those conversations that you're kind of left filling in the blanks for yourself, or you're left kind of maybe even measuring yourself against someone else's standard. And you really want to be careful not to try to meet the standard of a different head of household. You really do need to only be looking at your head of household and what is required of you when you are measuring, how do I behave here? What do I do? How should I react? Those are conversations that you need to have with your head of household, and so that's why we wanted to talk through this.
And if you're a head of household hearing this and saying, oh my gosh, I never even thought about this, maybe this is where we're having issues, that's okay. That's one reason why we're covering it. We are covering this subject, because as Aria was saying, this was something that didn't even really occur to us or even to me in our relationship early on, until we started to have some difficulties kind of in this area, and then we were able to address it.
So what does it mean to receive punishment well? And when we're talking about punishment, we're talking about the physical punishment of domestic discipline. We are talking about the spankings. How do you receive a spanking well? I think the first thing is to understand the process. Now, I know that our spanking process, our system, is very meticulous, almost too meticulous for some people. But there has to be some rhythm to the process. Even if you want the spanking itself to be more spontaneous, more head of household driven, you don't necessarily want to use times or, a set number of strokes or whatever you are doing. Even if you want it to just be kind of until the head of household decides that that's enough, you can do that and still have a rhythm to the process of punishment. And so that means that there's lecture, there is the spanking itself, there's maybe corner time either before or after, and then there's aftercare, right? So that's still a rhythm to the whole punishment process. And so you really want to create that rhythm so that your taken in hand knows what is expected. One
of the things that you brought up there is you might be saying, well, we want this to be head of household led. And yes, that is absolutely true. But one of the mistakes that we made early on was just almost making it to where it was impromptu for myself, where I almost got to make up everything as I went along. And that's what Aria was saying earlier, is no, you really do want to have some type of system set up so that your taken in hand does know a little bit about what to expect. You don't want to keep them completely in the dark. That is not going to bode well for them to be able to actually concentrate on receiving the punishment and being able to concentrate on how they need to modify their behavior next time, how they need to go about not letting this happen the next time. And so when you don't have things structured, when they're just saying, well, I don't know anything that's coming, that is making them worry more on about what is to happen rather than on what they're supposed to be doing, which is receiving that punishment and then trying to change their behavior later or change their behavior according to what's going on. So that's why it's very, very important to have some type of structure there, even if you don't do it as meticulously as we do.
And even as with our meticulous system, it is still very head of household driven.
Absolutely.
Because, Coda set the times. He has decided what that's going to look like. He also decides intensity, and he can add on to our times as he sees fit. So it's not that having our system boxes him into that process. So the reason why we decided to go with times, or really the reason why Coda decided to go with the times system, was to create a standard of punishment so that he wasn't inclined to go easy on me, because that was his temptation, was to make punishment light. And so by making a time that this is like the least amount of time possible for a punishment, it created a certain severity that he felt was appropriate when he was outside the moment. So that's why we went with that system. But beyond that, we had to figure out during lecture, what is my posture? Because that was something that we didn't really think about or consider. And so for a long time, we were sitting, on the same level. We were just sitting down having a discussion. And that's the other thing, is that lectures used to be discussions. I used to be able to respond, defend myself, try to justify myself. And we had to go through a expectation that that's not acceptable, that not only do I kneel now to where I am physically lower than Coda, but also I am to only respond with yes, sir, or no, sir, according to what I am being asked. And so that is kind of the standard by which you need to do the lecture part. And you get to decide what that looks like for you.
Absolutely.
You get to decide, do you want your taken in hand completely ready to receive punishment? Meaning, do you want her in the state of undress that she's going to be in during the punishment itself, during lecture? Is that something that happens in the transition from lecture into getting into position? Does she get ready at that point? Is there going to be corner time before the lecture, after the lecture, before the spanking or after the spanking? All of those things you get to decide how that's going to go. But just think through, is my taken in hand having a hard time receiving lecture? Is she trying to justify herself? Is there too much conversation? Is that derailing the process of her accepting accountability? And if so, think about how to implement some of these standards in order to make sure that your lectures are very concentrated and very driven toward her accepting accountability.
One challenge that I want to give head of households especially, but really this is for the taken in hands as well, is don't really skip over this step or try to do this step quickly. When you sit down to try and really when you sit down and you try to put together your punishment system, make sure that you don't skip or you try to do very quickly the lecture stage when you're talking about putting it together, especially head of households. You really want to try to be meticulous with this. One of the things that I didn't realize when we were first starting to do this is how important this part was. And so we, without knowing, just kind of said, okay, it's going to be there. And then just like what Arya said, it turned into more of a discussion. At times it turned into where Arya was trying to almost make a justification for what she had done and trying to, without even realize, change my mind on what I would do. And so this is something that you really need to spend time on and make sure it's structured correctly so that it can be effective leading into the punishment.
And I think it's really important to not only reiterate, like, this is what you did that led to this punishment, but this is how it affects me as your head of household. This is how it affects our relationship. This is why it's wrong. And that all needs to be part of your lecture, because if you just say, you broke this rule, so you're getting a spanking, that works, but it doesn't work as effectively as you broke this rule, and this is why it's so wrong when you do that, and this is what that could lead to, and this is the implications that it has on our relationship, and that is why I have to punish you, because this cannot happen again.
We've talked a lot about on this podcast about not skipping over the details in any area. This is definitely one of those things where you don't want to miss any details and you want to be as meticulous as possible because it will serve you well in the end. If you miss any details and you're not meticulous enough, you really are going to regret that, and you're going to find that you're going to have to wind up restructuring anyway to try and make things effective.
So now moving into the spanking itself, there has to be a standard by which the spanking is received, because it is way, way too easy to be reactionary as a taken in hand to a spanking, because it hurts. It is painful. It is not something that I necessarily want to endure. And it's something that if I allowed my natural reflexes to take over, it's something that I would absolutely not stay still for. So there has to be a standard by which you expect your taken in hand to receive a spanking.
Absolutely. And that is very, very key, and something that to a certain extent we sort of skipped over. I mean, we're telling you all the stuff where we kind of were in error when we first did it that we want to kind of save you on. And so you absolutely need to be very clear, head of households, exactly how you want her to behave. Even though it's painful, you have to be able to say, look, I don't want you to move out of this area. If you move out of this area, you've gotten out of position, and that's going to add time. You need to be very specific on what's going to happen. There's even things that I do where I will put my hand on the back of Aria's back, so to just kind of help steady her, to keep her to realize that I am here, I'm delivering the punishment. You are still fine, you are still safe, everything is fine, but I expect you to stay in this position. And so you need to really think about those things and really be, again, very meticulous in this area and setting this part up.
You need to be very detailed about what does it look like to stay in position for you.
Yes.
Before the spanking even starts, you need to have a standard that your taken in hand needs to get into position on her own. I think that it is the reason why we have domestic discipline, and the reason why it works, is because we're taking the chaos out of life. We are creating order and structure. And if you are putting your head of household into the position of having to force you into accepting a punishment, that creates chaos. And that is not going to yield good outcomes for your relationship. And so as a head of household, you do need to expect your taken in hand to put herself into position when you tell her that it's time. Now, there are times where Coda will tell me that it's time to get into position, and I take a deep breath and kind of ready myself, like prepare myself mentally for what I'm about to go through. And it takes me a few seconds, but I'm not allowed to delay that process. If he doesn't see me starting to move in that direction within like 10 seconds, it would be a problem. Because I am expected to be obedient and get myself into position. Once you are in position, it is your job to stay there. And like Coda was saying, it's so helpful when he does put his hand on the small of my back just to steady me. And that's really helpful because it does kind of anchor me into place. Could I move if I tried? Absolutely. Right. I could get out of position, but having his hand there just creates this like mental barrier that says that he's holding me. He is not forcing me down. He is not forcing me to stay in place. I could get out of position still if I really tried, but just having his hand there says he's holding me and I need to stay right here. And that's really, really helpful. Now you need to decide, what does staying in position mean to you? I know that there are other taken in hands that their head of households have higher standards of what it looks like to stay in position. And that is not a bad thing. They need to live to that standard because that is their head of household. So you do need to have the conversation of, what does it look like to stay in position? The furniture that we use, that I am bent over, my feet don't touch the ground. So I do not have the standard of keeping my feet on the ground, but there are some taken in hands that do. That is an expectation that their head of household has of them, because the position that they use allows their feet to be on the ground. And so you need to have these conversations about, how much movement is acceptable, if any, how much shifting is acceptable, where do you need to stay? And then you need to just go through all of that and set a consequence if it is not adhered to.
Absolutely. And these are all the things, again, that you need to sit down and you need to meticulously discuss. And especially head of households, you need to lead this conversation. You need to have in mind, before you start the conversation with your taken in hand, how you see things playing out in this area, in her staying in the position, what you want that to look like. All of those things. Have an idea before you come to the table and you talk about these things.
And again, that consequence for getting out of position, that is going to look different in every relationship as well. And it's also going to look different where you are in your relationship. If you are first starting out, the consequence for getting out of position might be lower. But if you are in a well-established relationship where you kind of know the song and dance, you know what the expectations are. And so if you break those expectations, it is a little bit more of an egregious action. So the consequences might be higher for doing that. And so you really do have to think about, how am I going to address this if my taken in hand does happen to break position.
Absolutely. And again, these are all things based on, as Arya said, if you're just starting out or if you're a seasoned veteran, if you will, of domestic discipline. But these are things that you definitely want to think through, and don't feel like this is a step that you should skip. This is very, very important.
I would also say that you really do need to consider how can you support your taken in hand succeeding in this area. Like Coda was saying, he puts his hand on my back. That is like the most important way that he helps me succeed in staying in position. Some couples will use a warm-up spanking before the spanking starts because it is a little bit easier to stay in position if you kind of ease into the process. Some couples don't want to use a warm-up because they feel like it degrades the process of punishment. I know that my spankings start out pretty intense, and that's by design, and that's for a reason. And so you just have to think through what will work for you, what makes sense for you, and how can you support your taken in hand succeeding in this area.
Absolutely. And that should always be your goal, head of households, is through this entire process. You want to help her succeed. What does it mean to help her succeed? You want the punishment to go well to where she does not want to do it again, and she does realize the gravity of what she did, and the punishment was, let's say, effective enough that she says, oh yeah, I definitely don't want to do that again. And but I know, and I have respect for him, and I know that I don't also want to do this again because I respect who he is. And so you want that punishment. All of these things are in a line to, again, make it effective, not just for you, but for her, so that hopefully you won't have to repeat this for the same offense again.
Yes. I would say also you need to have the discussion about talking during a spanking.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Some head of households like to lecture throughout the spanking. That's not something that Coda does anymore. He used to, it was really ineffective. I think for both of us. I think that it definitely made me like shift focus away from the process, because during the spanking itself, I am processing a lot within myself, and I get a lot of value from that. And I think that trying to lecture during the spanking was making it harder for you to make your points.
Yes, absolutely.
And so he doesn't do that anymore. Some head of households really like that process of lecturing throughout the spanking. But your taken in hand might try to talk during the spanking. And so you need to have a discussion about what is acceptable and unacceptable. There are some head of households that do not want to hear any type of talking from their taken in hand.
Right.
There are some head of households that don't mind or are unfazed by it. I know that for myself, I do process a lot verbally. I do like to process out loud. Now, I will try to kind of talk into my pillow so that I'm not necessarily bothering Coda with all of my, side comments. But my processing, my verbalization is, I don't want this, I don't like this, or I'm sorry. I don't ever say stop or indicate that he should stop or that he's doing something wrong.
Right.
Because if I did, he needs to be able to take that seriously.
Yes.
And because if I say that, then I'm saying that for the reason that something emergent is happening, that the spanking needs to stop because I feel something happening that's going wrong.
Right, like emergency situation, and in which case, head of households, you need to be very, very sensitive to that.
But because of that, I don't want to cry wolf. I don't want to be in the habit of saying, I need you to stop.
Right.
When I don't mean it. And we have actually created the standard that if I say that I need it to stop, Coda will stop and ask me why I said that, assess what's going on, most likely continue once he confirms that whatever I felt happened either happened and it's addressed or didn't happen at all. I've never actually had an emergency happen during a spanking.
No. And the good thing is too, when you just mentioned crying wolf, she's only asked to stop about twice really in the entire time, and we reassessed, we readjusted, and then I continued. But yes, no, we've never had an emergency where we've had to completely stop what's going on.
But because if I ask him to stop, he will stop. There is a standard that if I say that and he stops and I don't have a reason, that adds on to my punishment.
Right.
Because it's inappropriate for me to ask him to stop when there is no good reason.
So the key piece of advice here, head of households, is I let Arya have her process. And her process is that, yes, she is verbal. But she's verbal, as she says, in that way that I know she's processing. And so to an extent, do I ignore that? yes, I do ignore that to an extent, because I know what she's doing is not trying to get me necessarily to stop. Is that what she's doing is she's trying to process through the pain. She's trying to process again, oh, what did I do? And now I know that I've done something wrong if I didn't before. And she's trying to process all these different feelings and thoughts. And what I need to do is just completely focus on being safe as I'm giving her that punishment, and making sure that that punishment is being effective, and I'm following through with all the things that we've already talked about in the punishment.
And also, that cues you in to where I am in my headspace.
That's right.
Because you can tell not only through the posture of my body, how relaxed or tense I am, but also through how I am verbally processing if I have yielded.
Yes.
If I am in a submissive headspace, or if I am still resisting the process. And so that does give you valuable feedback and information. And yes, Coda pretty much does ignore what I'm saying, because it's not time for us to have any type of interaction.
Right.
And so that works for us. But again, this is a conversation that you have to have with your head of household, or head of households. You need to have a conversation with your taken in hand once you decide, what are you okay with? Because again, some head of households, they do not want to hear anything verbally from their taken in hand until after. Now, I will say that with the spankings, at the intensity that we have them, Coda is very open to me verbally expressing the pain that I'm experiencing. And so I think that, to be fair to your taken in hand, you really do need to allow for verbalization of that pain. And what I mean by that is like crying out, not necessarily screaming, because I feel like that is an act of defiance towards the process.
Yes.
But to verbally express, like, I am experiencing pain here. I think that that's very appropriate, and something that you have to consider your space, consider, do you need that process to be a little bit more quiet for privacy? And if so, how are you going to set your taken in hand up for success in that way? Because there are ways to look at, like, how you're pacing the spanking, or maybe what you're using for spanking, that she might be able to process less verbally. But don't go in with like the most painful implement to create the most painful spanking that you can, and then expect her not to have a verbal response to that.
Absolutely. And again, all of this is things that you really need to spend time thinking about, head of households, and really, and then not skimping. And what I mean by that is that there were a lot of things that I kind of made exceptions for in the beginning. When you have that set up, don't make exceptions. Follow through with those things.
The last part is that by the end of the spanking, you should expect your taken in hand to be yielded and submissive to the process. You should expect her to accept accountability for what she did, to understand why the punishment was necessary, and to have a soft and submissive response to you.
Absolutely. And so we have it set up to where if Aria has not submitted to the process, I continue. And I have the option to, even if we have stopped at that moment, but I see that she has not submitted to the process, that she still is not totally done with processing what is going on, and maybe even what she did was wrong, we can continue. And so these are all of the things that you need to, again, take into account, that that's part of receiving the punishment. Is, did she complete the process? And now is she going through that aftercare process, if you will, that we would call, where she realizes, okay, I've surrendered to the punishment, and now I'm getting myself regulated back emotionally. And if she hasn't done that yet, then you've got to continue.
If you use corner time, when are you going to use it, and what does that look like? All things that you have to consider. What is her posture? What is the expectation while she's there? What do you want her focusing on? All of those things you want to consider as you are setting up these standards. And then with aftercare, you want her to be soft and submissive towards you. And what do you expect from that aftercare time? Is she expected to ask for forgiveness? Is there a formal apology that needs to be made? Is there, do you expect her to thank you for the discipline? If it's maintenance or, a preemptive spanking where maybe she doesn't have anything to apologize for, do you still expect her to thank you? All of those things you need to consider. What will make that process meaningful, not only for you as a head of household, but what is going to drive her submission?
Absolutely. And that may also mean, like what we do in our process, is I try to embrace Aria. I try to give her a very, very tight hug and let her know that all has been made right, all has been forgiven, and that I still love her, all of those things, but with physical touch and by embracing her and all of those things. And of course, she mentioned corner time, where that gives her a chance to go through that process after the punishment to really, again, regulate herself again and deal with all of those emotions in a time, rather than trying to make this quick transition. It's a very simple and slow transition period. So you got to take all of these things into account and really try to think about, again, all of the little details from start to finish to help you.
And I am expected to apologize.
That's right.
If I've done something
Absolutely.
wrong, I'm expected to apologize. I'm expected to ask for forgiveness. And only after I do that does CODA extend that forgiveness to me.
Yes.
And so there is a standard by which all of these things happen. And from lecture to aftercare, that is the punishment process. Punishment is not just spanking. It is the entire process that you go through. And to skip or gloss over any of these areas, you're really doing your punishments a disservice.
Absolutely. And that's why we're saying learn from our mistakes, because there were a lot of things that we glossed over that we didn't even realize for some of them. Some of them we thought we could cut corners. We didn't realize how important all of these were. And so now that we're being very meticulous, very detailed in all of these areas, we realize that's really what helps make the punishments effective. And overall, what you want is that it obviously is going to help make your relationship better.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this. We're going to continue this discussion in the post show. If you want to get access to our post show, you can do so with a Patreon membership or a YouTube membership. Links to all of that is down below. Otherwise, we will talk to you next time.
See you later.